June 7, 1944. Off the coast of Normandy, the sea is gray and heavy. Waves slap against the hulls of ships packed tight from horizon to horizon. Smoke drifts inland from the beaches of Omaha and Goldie, thin, black ribbons twisting into the sky. On the deck of a British command vessel, a young royal engineer named Lieutenant David Lawson peers through binoculars at the chaos on shore. Tanks are bogged in sand, landing craft founder on the tide. Behind him, the radio crackles with the voice of a harried American officer. We've got no docks. The beach is choking with trucks. We're out of space and time. For months, planners had known this moment would come. The bottleneck. The Allied invasion was the most ambitious, amphibious operation in history, but everyone understood the unspoken truth. Capturing a beach was easy. Feeding an army through it was not. Behind Lawson, Commander Bruce White, Royal Navy, lowers his own binoculars and mutters, "Then let's build one." It sounds insane. The nearest intact harbor of Cherbourg was still in German hands. Every port along the French coast has been mined, flooded, or wrecked by retreating defenders. Yet here they stand, ordered by Churchill himself to perform an engineering miracle, build an artificial harbor big enough to feed 1 million men. From the middle of the sea, the idea had begun 2 years earlier, scribbled in a memo to the Prime Minister. The problem of ports may be solved by the following: bring the ports with us. It was codenamed Operation Mulberry. And now, on D1, that idea is about to meet the full fury of the English Channel. Far to the north, across the Channel, the ports of Portsmouth, Southampton, and Tilbury had transformed into something out of science fiction. Rows of colossal concrete boxes, each the size of a small apartment building, waited on the tide, tethered like silent beasts. They were called Phoenix caissons, hollow, watertight structures meant to be sunk offshore to form a breakwater. Nearby floated steel roadways called whales. 80-foot-long bridge spans mounted on pontoons. Engineers joked they looked like a child's Meccano set. In truth, they were the bones of a city that could rise from the sea. On June 6, as the invasion fleet departed, tugs began hauling these strange constructs across the Channel. Each tow took more than a dozen vessels alow, straining under the weight of thousands of tons of concrete. The crews navigated treacherous swells and minefields, all without the protection of harbors or shelter. It was an act of pure faith. Lieutenant Lawson's team reached the French coast under cover of fog. The beach still smelled of cordite and burned oil. Dead men and broken landing craft littered the shallows. As the first Phoenix units arrived, a sailor looked at the floating wall of gray and murmured, "Looks like we're towing a city straight from England." By June 9, the first section was in place. Divers guided the caissons into position, opening valves to flood their hollow cores. Slowly, they sank, thudding onto the seabed with a sound that carried for miles underwater, like the heartbeat of something awakening. From the cliffs above, German artillery observers could see strange geometric shapes forming in the surf. A line of concrete and steel stretching into the sea. reports reached the German 84th Corps headquarters in St. Lo. Enemy is constructing port facilities directly off the beach. No visible foundation. The officers dismissed it as an exaggeration. It wasn't. June 19, 1944, 12 days after D-Day, a storm rolled in from the Atlantic, one of the worst in half a century. Winds howled at 60 miles per hour. Waves rose higher than a two-story house. Across the channel, allied meteorologists watched in horror as the floating harbor still incomplete was hammered by nature itself. Lieutenant Lawson and his men clung to their steel roadways as sections twisted and snapped. One spud pier, a floating platform for unloading tanks, broke free and vanished into the surf. The men could hear the creaking of cables and the deep groan of metal under strain. By dawn, the American Mulberry at Omaha Beach, Mulberry, was gone, torn apart, scattered across the seabed. Only Mulberry B, at the British sector of Romanches, remained partially intact. Churchill received the report in silence. The Prime Minister had called these harbors the boldest gamble in military engineering. Now half of that gamble had been lost, but the remaining harbor, Port Winston, would survive. Rebuilt under fire, within days, engineers returned to work. They repaired broken spans, ray-floated pontoons, and realigned sunken caissons. Trucks began to roll down the floating roadways once again. From the sea, the harbor looked alive, cranes swinging, ships unloading, men shouting orders over the roar of engines. It was not beautiful, but it worked. German intelligence intercepted reconnaissance photos. What they saw defied belief. Rows of Liberty ships unloading cargo at a place where, weeks before, there had been nothing but open sea. By autumn 1944, the beaches of Normandy no longer echoed with the crash of waves and artillery, but with the rumble of engines. Convoys rolled east toward Paris, Reims, and beyond, fueled, armed, and fed by the harbor that shouldn't have existed. From the air, reconnaissance photos revealed an extraordinary sight: a living machine on the sea. Miles of steel roadways pulsed with traffic. Barges came and went in an endless rhythm, a tide of human ingenuity. At the center stood the Phoenix caissons, their concrete walls streaked with rust and salt. Barnacles clung to their sides like medals on a veteran's chest. Every piece bore scars of the storm, yet they endured. By the time Antwerp was opened in the fall, Port Winston had already outperformed every projection. It handled over 40% of all Allied cargo landed in the first 100 days after D-Day. For many engineers, this was not just a logistical triumph, it was proof of something deeper, that imagination itself could be a weapon. In August, as the British Army advanced toward the Seine, Lieutenant Lawson stood once more on the deck of a command barge. The sun was setting behind Romanches, turning the sea to molten gold. Around him, cranes swung lazily, unloading crates marked to front priority. The harbor groaned and hummed like a living creature. It was no longer just steel and concrete. It was a bridge between chaos and order, between the impossible and the achieved. He thought back to that First morning off Normandy, gray skies, the voice on the radio, the words that had started it all. We've got no docks. Now, behind him, an entire port floated where none had before. As the last convoys rolled ashore and the war surged inland, the men of the Royal Engineers and Seabees knew their creation would fade into history, dismantled by winter storms and time, but for a few months in 1944, they had built something no army had ever seen: the harbor. Born from imagination, sustained by courage, and remembered as the miracle of Port Winston. Autumn 1944, German reconnaissance flights still circled Romanches, their pilots stunned by what they saw there. Functioning port where charts showed only open coastline. Allied troops called it Winston's Port. German prisoners whispered about the floating fortress. In Berlin, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht reviewed the aerial photos. One staff officer reportedly said, "They have built an island." Another murmured, "Then we are finished." The irony was brutal. The Third Reich, master of concrete and steel, had been defeated by floating bridges and flexible thinking. For the Allies, Mulberry was more than engineering. It was proof that imagination could outfight ideology. By November, Cherbourg and other French ports had been captured, and the Mulberries were no longer essential. Their frames creaked in winter seas, their pontoons rusted, but their purpose was fulfilled. They had bought the Allies time, and time, in war, is victory. Lieutenant Lawson, standing on the Pier 1 evening, watched the sun sink over the channel. The waves slapped gently against the caissons. The harbor's silhouette glowed gold in the fading light. Cranes, trucks, men still working. He thought of those first days, when the sea itself had seemed the enemy. Now it was their greatest ally. We build a harbor from the ocean, he whispered, and the ocean let it stand. Months later, as Allied forces crossed the Rhine, remnants of the Mulberry still stood in Normandy, silent monuments to human will. Even German engineers who studied the wreckage after the war admitted it was beyond anything they had believed possible. No nation, wrote one, ever moved the sea as the Allies did.